Okay, good. Go ahead.
All right, so it is 7:09. We'll call this meeting of the Seaburg Board of Education to order, and we'll start with the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we'll start with audience of citizens. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to address the Board of Education this evening. Is there anyone that would like to address the board?
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm here on that.
Okay.
Bill Lawson, 454 Main Street. About a year ago, I requested Freedom of Information Act regarding copiers and printers associated with the schools. Full disclosure, I've been in the industry for about 30 years, so I completely understand the industry in depth. Over the past 12 months, I've met with different members of the administration, both past and present. I have given them all the information regarding the copier contracts. If you were to guess how much Old Saybrook spends on copiers, it's $21,000 a month. Relative school districts around that are a third of that price. And the contract was signed under the HEPA contract 2 years ago. That's a GPO that is recognized within towns in the state of Connecticut. That being said, the pricing on that HEPA contract, when compared to MSRP, exceeds MSRP cost, which is a violation of the HEPA contract. The MSRP of the Xerox devices that are in place today is $507,000 and $250. The MSRP provided by your current that's $543,639. Now, let me just be clear. Anyone paying MSRP is getting ripped off severely. If you're paying over MSRP, not only are you in violation of the correct HEPA contract, but you're also really getting ripped off. So for a comparison's sake, I use the state of Connecticut pricing, which is probably the most used contract for most towns and municipalities. The contract pricing for just equipment from your current vendor is $16,965 a month. The state of Connecticut pricing, equipment only, is $6,022.21. I don't know who here donated to the lights. I know a lot of taxpayers who donated to the lights where my kid plays lacrosse. That could have paid for it, could pay for another teacher, could pay for another town employee here. So for my concerns to go unaddressed via emails, meetings, in person, and for me to have to come here, it's infuriating to me, especially when the data provided shows that the town is out of compliance with their copier contract. So I'll leave it with you to understand. Everyone understands MSRP. Everyone understands paying over MSRP is not, it's a major red flag. I pointed these things out. The comments have been, well, Breck has the same counsel that we do, would be a problem. Have you addressed it with your current vendor? Have you said, hey, we're above MSRP and out of compliance? Has that been done? Simple things to say, hey, listen, we're getting ripped off. We recognize we're getting ripped off on our copiers. And what can you do for us about it? Has that even been done? Now, I know you don't answer the questions, but these are all things that not only myself, but all my friends who are taxpayers in town, they all want to know the answers to it. They're like, Bill, you gotta drive this home. And I have no problem doing it, because I know the industry and I have all the data in front of me, so. I don't know how you'd like me to share this data out to everybody so that you all have copies of it. And you can see for yourselves how badly this contract was written. So addressing, my two goals for tonight are to address the current contract that is in place, that we're significantly overpaying for. And the second thing is, what policies and procedures are gonna be put into place so that we're not in this position, not only in this purchasing item, but what about everything else that is purchased? You know, is it over $1,000 a month? We go out to bid, or we look at a RFP. I realize there's limited man hours. We could have hired someone to do this, right? So address the contract that is in place today, but also address moving forward. What policies do we have in place to ensure we are not getting hoodwinked by a vendor? All you needed to do was get one other quote, and you would have been at $6,000 a month. Instead, we're at $17,000. So it's kind of sickening that it hasn't been addressed by the parties here and who have been part of it, and the excuses on why it wasn't addressed. So hopefully this will open someone's eyes tonight, and you'll say, I'm gonna take this and run with it, or whatever you do with the data that's provided you to by the public. But this is a gross misspend of funds for copiers. I'm not even gonna address why the copiers are so big, meaning, why do you need 100-page-a-minute machines? Why do you need these big color devices? I work with a lot of school districts. Print shops that do this for work don't have the horsepower that Old Sabre Schools has.
Mr. Lawson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're at the time
3
limit
minutes, right?
for the,
What should I do as a follow-up?
as a follow-up, if you'd like to email me whatever content that you have that you want to share with the board, then that's fine. As you know, and as you stated beforehand, the board won't necessarily address the comment
Get it?
for tonight, but thank you for coming in.
Maybe during the fiscal part.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.
Anyone else that would like to address the board in the audience of citizens? No? Anyone online, Trent?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, then we will move on to reports from our board reps.
So for the month of January, we're gonna start with academics, and part of the end of December. So the Course Day concert got rescheduled to December 16th. And there was a Band Aid concert on December 18th. There were NEMFA auditions on December 14th. And there was a select ensemble concert at the First Church of Old Saybrook on December 15th. And the entrepreneur class is selling RAM like merch, and those are like hoodies, pants, and like magnet stickers. There was a CIAC leadership conference at Southern Connecticut State University on December 6th. And there's the midterms exam this Thursday, Friday, and next Tuesday and Wednesday. There was a Taj night last Thursday, and today after school, there was a PJs and prep for freshmen, which is just to prepare the freshmen for midterm. Moving on to sports, indoor track had a meet at Hill House High School on the 9th. And their next meet is on the 1st of March at Floyd Little Athletic Center. Boys basketball is 2 and 6, and they had a JV and varsity game at Valley last night. The girls basketball is 6 and 3, and they had a varsity game also at Valley last night. Crew is still going for conditioning for the spring season, and they had a movie night last Friday to raise funds and get more people for the team. And cheer has been practicing daily for routines and for the competitive interseason. Moving on to clubs, Drama Club is rehearsing for the musical Mean Girls, which will have performances on March 6th, 7th, and 8th. The Crisis Text Line Group is attending Zoom meetings for media training. There were GSA meetings on January 14th and January 16th, and NHS meeting on January 14th discussing yearly service projects of mentoring middle schoolers. Student government is planning their spring blood drive. The Rambler January edition is to be published in the next 2 weeks. The Ecology Club had a alumni hike on the 4th of January. And Youth in Government is reaching out to local businesses for community locations to hold fundraisers. And on the students' opinions, students encountering issues in grading differences between teachers who teach the same courses. So they're the same curriculum, but different strictness in grades and weighting, credit and like retake opportunities. Students have thought that the midterm scheduling was really inconvenient as teachers are cramming in a lot of extra learning in the weeks before, in between break and exams. And the students didn't like the return back from break that was on the Thursday and Friday. Students feel the challenge by choice override opportunity to take classes without taking prerequisites lead to many kids in their classes to think that they're not ready for, and they're thinking that they're slowing the classes down. And students feel the high school doesn't do enough for college preparation. For example, if the student is a first generation to go to college or the oldest child, they feel that they're left to figure all that stuff out on their own. That concludes the report.
Any questions?
So, on your, sorry, this one here.
Yep.
On your student, opinions, which I love that section. So how do you communicate those concerns to administration? And then how do they then, how do you communicate follow-up and feedback and like that? How does that work?
So far, we are still working on the survey to get better data and to be able to communicate with the principal and vice principal. But we've just been going around and simply asking questions and like group leaders of like say clubs and getting personal opinions that they've gotten and that we've gotten.
Okay, because you're getting great feedback.
Yeah.
So, you've got to communicate.
I see
Yeah.
where there needs to be interaction.
And so then you'd bring it to school administration? Like you're sharing it with them?
We bring it here.
So this is, I think that's what you're looking, you're
Yeah,
asking.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
What do you do
how
with the information? So it comes here to
principal-
the board
Yeah,
and that's it right now?
so far, yeah.
Okay.
We talked about all this stuff. I'm not surprised. Actually, we talked a lot about this with Mr. A and I talked last week at super.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so
Okay.
superintendent's.
Yes.
Meeting. Okay,
Good.
so then we want that followed through. Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions?
One clarification, who attends the superintendent meetings?
Well, Mr. A and myself, and then any of the students that have volunteered to be on it. I
And
know
that
there's
changes each year.
changes each year. I know there's an emphasis right now. We currently don't have any freshmen. So there's officers within super and it's a recognized club. Kids are actually working to sort of promote and recruit more freshmen. But we have an open dialogue about whatever's on their mind that day and just kind of giggling. We just had this conversation. A lot of the stuff came from there. So they are getting their word out to Mr. A.
And it's once a month or once every,
Twice a week, twice a month.
twice a month. Okay.
And then after the feedback in the super meeting, can you talk a little bit to the process of like what happens after that?
Follow up is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so let's say they bring something to us, sometimes it's a quick fix, right? It might be, well, how come this wasn't planned on a particular day, or we might be able to answer them in real time. Other things, like some of the things you heard throughout the year about the pass system. So, well, that'll come up and Mr. A and I will share with them, with the kids, sort of the updates in the process and where we're going with that, although we couldn't really surprise Mr. Plotkin that was bringing to someone that we weren't allowed to say what the update was. So a lot of it is just the dialogue with the students. If there's things that we can address right away, and then if we're hearing something for the first time, usually Joe and I will talk in between meetings, and if we can report back to the kids about something we may have heard at the previous meeting that there's a remedy to, or a reason why, or something that may move itself forward. That's sort of informally, but that's how it's been going, at least for the first half of this.
So, I don't want to dwell on this, but for example, the students encountering issues with grading differences with the same classes, or the challenge by choice, those were sort of, for me, I think, sort of significant concerns for the students, and that's not a quick explanation, I would think. So, administration, principals, I would think would have to, you know, give that some consideration about how to address those questions. Joe?
Yes. Well, yeah, I could take.
Okay.
So. Throughout the year, some of the concerns were raised about maybe. Process or.
Yeah.
Or consistency amongst, one
Yeah.
particular class over another. We have shared, like, one of the things that came up that wasn't on the list was some more consistency you've heard it at the beginning of the year about the. Transition for freshmen, right?
Mhm.
So that actually materialized into Joe and I going and meeting with all the freshman classes to say, how is it going? I think it was a lot of timing, like by the time we got to the kids, they were already comfortable. The first week when they may have been asked, it was chaos because they were lost, they didn't know where they were going. But we'll talk about, so one of the things came up of how can they, as student leadership, be more involved in helping freshmen transition? One of the things I know, don't put Dave on the spot, is working with Matt at the middle school about having our teachers communicate more at the end of the year, maybe even creating days over the summer. That order connects them. We're able to give them an update of their idea of wanting to be more connected, whereas the administration is working on the same thing. Just enlightening them that we're actually hearing the same things from multiple places. So it's really a dialogue of, if there's something concrete that we can fix, certainly try to within the 2 week span. You can jump in. I don't want to steal all your thunder here. If there's other things, there's things that we're hearing about for the first time, so we'll definitely put it on the list, and then. On the backside of that, I mean, I don't want to give away any state secrets, but. Joe and I may hear things in Superin, then I'll come back to DLT and tell these folks that you see here this evening. Hey, get working on that, or how can we make this happen? So there is a cyclical way of getting and gathering the information, but we're definitely here.
Great, thank you so much for the report. Great, Karen, any correspondence?
We do not have any correspondence.
Next item is we'll need a motion for the regular meeting minutes for December 10th.
Second.
Moved by Jane, seconded by Karen. Any discussion? All in favor? Approving? Okay. Any, thank you. Opposed? And I'll abstain. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Motion passes. So then we'll move on to our budget presentation.
Okay.
Sorry, I gotta share it with the people at home. They don't see it.
All we see is Joe.
Joe is the budget.
Joe is, that's it.
I apologize for that.
To share the budget presentation. Yeah.
Might just have to run it here. So the problem with this is that Joe and Krista can't see it.
Okay. All right, you're off the hook. Matt, Dave, you're up. No pressure.
Well, Joe and Krista, can you still hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so we're having sharing problems with the technology, so. Listen up.
We'll cue to you and.
Yeah.
I think I've memorized my slides, so I might be able to do the first part. Just let me know when it's up.
We ready to go?
I'm ready to go. All right.
So obviously, this is the superintendent's proposed budget. Few disclaimers, that's important for not just the board to know, but. One, obviously, we have a lot of folks in the room. I want to thank all the members of DLT for coming out tonight, because this is really a collaborative issue. I thought it was important that everyone gets an opportunity to talk about their own particular areas instead of just hearing from me. It's also important to know is a lot of this will look familiar because the commitment that obviously I'm new, Pam is new in her role, a lot of new faces. We committed to keeping the process through the budget and fiscal committee for this year the same. So everything will look similar. The books will be the same. Presentations will look a bit the same. And any sort of enhancements or tweaks going forward was something that we can talk about. But for that, the familiarity with what you're used to is all there. And everything in the district obviously starts with our strategic plan and the goals within the strategic plan. To equity, high quality instruction, and a safe and supportive learning environment. You all know what that is, so I won't read it to you in the essence of time. I will just point out that under the first part, we see on the dates, 2021 to 2026. 2026 is rapidly approaching. So we are actually in the processes at DLT of starting to talk about what's the next plan look like and what process will we go through. That's not something that we as an administration pulls together. This is a board strategic plan, so that's a conversation, a dialogue we all have to have. But right now, this is the plan that we have that everything must align to. Next. The budget process is usually a reflection on what you've done in the previous year, and what you're gonna build upon going into next fiscal year. So one of the things that was a challenge was I wasn't here for a lot of this. So I've taken a lot of what I've heard from all of you and people in the community about the successes that you've had prior to my arrival. Under goal 1 for equity, the creation of an equity and action coalition, which we've actually seen now through a lot of impacts through the calendar committee that I didn't know existed until a couple weeks ago. At all of our schools, we had a lot of culturally themed student events. And something else that we'll hear later on when Dr. Fletcher talks about the increased access for our multi-language learners. So under equity, you did a lot of work and a lot of great things. Moving on. Under your second goal with high quality instruction is just a couple of highlights of things that had happened and a couple of, I'm sure, people in this room and some of our teachers may be at home watching and might twitch a little bit when they talk about the new educator evaluation system, but that was a big project and a big goal that had to be worked on. It was not easy, but a lot of people, not just in this room, but throughout the district had to coexist to make this happen, and would proudly say we finally have a plan to the state that's been approved and signed. But I know that caused a lot of anxiety for not just everyone in this room, but also all of our amazing teachers that were basing their whole evaluation system on something that was relatively brand new. Without going through each of the goals that were met, I just want to highlight, because I am relatively new here, one of the coolest things I've seen since I've been here has been Saybrook Studies. And that's obviously something that's unique to the community. But not knowing what it was before I had gotten here or started to research it, but actually seeing it, not just seeing the sense of pride that goes into it, but seeing the kids talk about it is something that's very unique and very special to this place that I thought it was important to have. So in interest of time, we know about obviously the middle school being a spotlight award. Yes. And then obviously a safe and supportive environment. Right now, Goodwin School is a responsive classroom program. There's been a lot of resources and time and training and emphasis on increasing that. And what I've also seen before people actually had a chance to tell me was this enhanced advisory program that we've had at the secondary level, and also modified student support teams at both the middle and the high schools. As I'm walking through the high school, I'm hearing kids talk to me about advisory, about how different opportunities through Flex to meet with different people. So a lot of that was all done prior to my arrival here. But it just increased the awareness about the commitment that the district has to providing a safe and supportive environment for our students. Next. Now I'm gonna turn it over. Joe, are you awake?
I'm awake, yes.
Okay,
So,
You're on, starting at Old Saybrook High School.
yeah. The slide you're seeing focuses in, the first part is on the advanced placement courses. We ran 10 and 23-24 school year for grades 10, 11, and 12. Our kids traditionally do very well in them. Some colleges accept a 3 on up to 4 or 5. 86% of our kids, as you can see, scored a 3 or above. So we feel that's really successful. And Mr. Plotkin will talk about the rest of the slide.
You can see equally successful as our students enrolled in ECE courses were learning college credit, UConn credit with a successful completion. You can see the high success rate there, but what doesn't jump out there is the number of students that are in those courses. We are, again, for the second year in a row now, among the top 10 high schools in the state of Connecticut in terms of a percentage of students that are enrolled in those ECE courses. So that's a good chunk of our population and something that we're really proud of, that we're getting those students access to that experience, college experience before they leave Old Saybrook High School. And we're looking to continue to expand those ECE courses. We've added 2 new courses this year that are running since 23-24, and those courses are really highly enrolled, and students are enjoying them. And we keep looking to make sure that the ECE offerings are wide in terms of the interest area, so that we're giving opportunities for students to pursue those regardless of what their interests are. And then that last point there about electric boat, we are continuing to also expand in terms of the trades, working to expand career pathways by strategically offering our existing courses and new courses, so that we build opportunities for exposure to the trades earlier on in the high school experience, and so that kids can get that experience and say, oh, that might be something I'm interested in, and pursue it through existing and new courses that we're looking at adding.
Dave. Moving on to the middle school.
Sure, thank you, Dave and Joe.
Anybody want to, hi, Krista.
Chris is there. Superintendent presented most of our slides, so quickly to go over some of the highlights, really focused on the middle school being innovative in its learning practices and our strong community connections, really trying to work with our students to get them involved. We have such a luxury of our proximity to Main Street. And there's so many resident experts that do so many wonderful things up there. So enabling our students to have those interactions and learn from the true experts in our town has been a really rewarding experience for us. As mentioned, one of 27 schools to receive the New England League Middle School Spotlight Award for best middle schools across New England. Again, awarded from New England League of Middle Schools with the Broadhagen Award, which looks at innovative ideas in the classroom, and superintendent touched on that Saybrook Studies class. And that's really what they came down to look at. And they're really impressed with many of the same things that kids having the ability to really understand their town history, how they're connected to it, and then really having some choice, real true choice about things of interest that they have that connect themselves to this community. So a lot to come there, and we're really proud of that program. Main Street Math, another example of kids getting up on Main Street and interacting with the community to do work and understand what happens up there in those businesses and how they're run. And then taking it back and creating their own little Main Street in the middle school is really impressive. It's a highlight when we have huge agencies like the Connecticut Association of Schools coming to Old Saybrook to visit us and look at what we're doing, right? And then they're sharing that with the greater community in the state, saying, look at Old Saybrook and look at the great things that are happening in that environment, and why don't we take that out and look at that as an exemplar for our state. And our Kindness Club, lastly here, certainly not least, applied for and received a national recognition of a school of kindness, looking at empathy and creating a culture of kindness within the middle school. So those are our highlights. That's it.
Thank you, Matt, and good evening, everyone. Chris mentioned that we are responsive classroom school, which basically means we have adopted that social emotional curriculum. 2 big components of that is morning meeting. Students every morning sit with their teacher in their community, and they share what's been happening in their class. They do a lot of team building activities, And another big piece is, you know, you break it, you fix it. So if students have a problem on the bus, they no longer come to me. We go talk to the bus driver. We have a meeting and we discuss what's happening on the bus. And students have conversations and they repair any environments that they have perhaps broken. And that goes along with friends as well. Of course, at the elementary level, there are lots of learning opportunities of how to get along with friends. So a lot of apologies, a lot of discussions, and a lot of, you know, making promises and being held accountable. Spanish continues daily in all of our classrooms, K to 4. It has expanded to our morning announcements. So we have morning announcements, the pledge in Spanish. And most recently, we've started Goodwin Buddies Dose. And this is a partnership between all of our ML students and native speaking students at the high school. Actually, some at the high school aren't native speaking. And they come into classes with our ML students and they sit as buddies at least once a week. Sometimes they come to lunch, sometimes they go to recess. And just giving these students opportunity to meet with someone who's a high school student that went through and walked their same path. So it's been really rewarding. They've had some field trips as well. So that's a growing program. We have lots of clubs to keep kids engaged. Our school counselors, our social worker and school psychologists are constantly working closely with students and with families. We have a backpack food program on Fridays where we sneak food into students' backpacks that go home for weekends to support them and their families. And lastly, along the equity goal, which is goal number 1, we have implemented a before and after school care program for our early childhood students. That's not something that the YMCA offered before, and we partnered with them to get certification to do that. So now those families have access to before and after school care through the Y. Thanks for the opportunity.
There are some highlights for extracurriculars and athletics. One thing we're really trying to do is push student leadership. This was something we really focused on last year. One thing we're really trying to do this year is get some of that away from athletics. When we talk about leadership in schools, we think of, you know, the captain of the basketball team or the captain of the field hockey team. This year, we sent student government to a leadership conference at Southern rather than sending members of the athletic team. Some of those are also members of student government. We also sent members of fine arts clubs to a leadership conference this year. We were one of the few schools that did that and didn't focus solely on athletics. As schools change in size, we're looking to create new relationships. One of the things, we're one of the smaller schools in the state. Shoreland Conference is one of the smaller conferences in the state. We struggle to find schools that are on our same level when it comes to student population. We typically went to the ECC for a lot of our games. Though that conference has kind of shifted and now we're kind of left with some holes to fill. And that all happened this year. So we're trying to branch out and find other schools who are similar to us. So we're branching out that way. One thing that was another point for me was with the teacher evaluation process, changing up this year, I wanted to change up how we evaluate coaches. And a lot of that was how many times we meet, whether we're meeting in the off season, whether we're doing, you know, if you're a new coach, I want to meet with you 3 times a year rather than 2, depending on, you know, how well you did in your evaluation the year before, then putting more plans in place similar to teacher evaluations. That was a big one. We're always looking to upgrade our facilities. We had dugouts put in for baseball and softball at the middle school. We had new goals put in on the turf at the high school for soccer, which meant we got to kick down our old goals to grass fields. So now we have 3 usable fields at all times. We also have a full-time field, which it's the only full-time field in Saybrook, 100-yard field for soccer in a town that really loves soccer. I think that's something really important that we need to have as many opportunities as possible. We're still looking at exploring funding for sports not offered by Old Saybrook Public Schools, those cooperatives. And we are looking to update the handbook to address new positive and negative trends in society, athletics, and academics.
Last but certainly not least, Sarah.
Hi, thank you all for having us again. My department covers a lot of things. So, and part of that is the preschool. So this year we really have tried to support our preschool and some of our surprise students with increasing behavioral supports. And we've tried to do that through training some paraeducators to become RBTs, which are registered behavior technicians. And using those people to incorporate and support those preschool classes. We are also continuing to look at our staffing and how we're utilizing our current staffing to support instruction that is specifically linked to the goals and objectives of our students with disabilities. We have really tried to expand some of our opportunities for students to be able to show their learning, and we've talked about that as part of high quality instruction. But again, our students tend to have specific goals and objectives, but we like to see how they can apply those goals and objectives, not only in the school, but in the greater community, and coming up with some ideas and creative concepts to get them out more into the general population of the school and into the general community, so that they're practicing. And then again, we are really lucky to have a lot of counseling support in all three schools, but we're still working on looking at targeted skill instruction. We do have great screeners still, and we're using that information from our screeners to provide support. But again, looking at trends and how we can anticipate what a need might be and pre-plan or pre-teach strategies for students so that when a stressful situation happens, they already have the tools that they need to support that or to face that. So those are the things that we're concentrating on.
Sarah. So this is a bit of a tradition that comes through the budget process, which I actually like. And I know Joe can't see it, so I had Joe on my list to do this one, so I'll just take it from here. But this is where we're preparing our students for. And there's gonna be a slide after that continues this, but this gives the community an idea to see where our kids end up. And as you can see, not all of our kids go to a traditional four-year college or university. And as Dave mentioned with our connection with EB and a lot of kids going into trade, some kids taking a gap year, going into employment. It's good to reflect that, but you see 88 of our total graduating class. This is where our kids are ending up. So at the end of the day, when people want to know what are we in this for, we're in this to make sure that when they walk across that stage in June, kids are on path to meet their highest aspirations and what they wanted. And did we prepare them for it? And this is evident that we did. As I said earlier, the budget development process didn't change. We start where we have discussions with the board and the budget and fiscal committee about starting the process and about what the process that we're going to follow. We go through internally and start looking at enrollment and program projections, and we create ultimately what a sustained services budget would be. We try to go through and identify some cost saving measures where we can, or maybe some efficiencies that we can find. Or maybe some cost avoidance in some cases, but that's all part of the process. And then obviously we have a discussion, and this can go in any particular order, because when we actually build the budget, which we'll see in a second, we do start at the building level and having conversations with our staff members on the ground. So moving on. Other considerations for this particular budget, just like you're used to, we start with zero. We build it from the ground up. We do take, I know it's a sort of a double-edged sword sometimes when you're talking about school budgets and all the great things we want to do and things that we have to do, which I'll get to in 2 things later. But we also have to do it with one eye on being fiscally responsible, because ultimately the taxpayers will save our cap to approve this. Cannot go without saying that the needs of our kids are changing. And the changing educational and modes of instruction for our kids are changing. Anybody can just look back over the last 5 years, and the kids that came in 5 years ago are not the same kids that are coming in now. And I think all of us have to recognize that. In addition, there are things that we don't control, but we do pay for, and those are called legislative mandates. There are things, we had a policy committee meeting earlier this evening where we had to change a bunch of policies, not because I wanted them to or because Baker wanted them to, it's because the law said you got to do it. And we're not immune to that either. So if the law changes and we have to make a reflection, there might be a reflection in what we ask for with regards to resources. There are ongoing requirements for our HVAC system. We're in year 2 of the science of reading. I will kick that over to Dr. Fletcher in a moment. The 2 of those areas, I'm going to take them off the hook. Talked earlier about teacher evaluations and the science of reading. Again, science of reading was another mandate. There's a cost to it. It was not just the physical cost of buying the program, but training our staff members. There's no price tag on the anxiety that it put everybody through, but that was the law. The law was you're going to go with one of these reading systems. Same with teacher evaluation process. That's a law. That changed. Everybody could have liked the one we had. Didn't matter. We need to upgrade it. And when it comes to maintaining our facilities and providing a clean and safe and healthy learning environment, look, I haven't been here long enough to realize everything, but I recognize that some of our buildings are a little older. I will say our buildings are remarkably well taken care of. And our buildings and grounds crew and our custodial crew do an amazing job in taking pride in our buildings. You would not guess how old our buildings actually are. So yes, we're gonna have to have a conversation in this room in coming years about infrastructure, because things are constantly fluxing. But for what we have, they're very well maintained, and they should be, our staff members should be commended for that. Moving on. Historical enrollment data. This is the number that we base everything off with regards to the October 1 being the magic date, and that's the official number that we're on record with the state of Connecticut. So you can see we're on record, we're down about 2 kids. But in reality, we're actually up a little bit more than that. Our enrollment from October 1 has increased, but the state only cares about October. Within there, we break out and this is something that we had a conversation earlier about. I think it'll be a further conversation with the permission of the chair down the road. Why do we delineate the population of our kids based on those categories? Special education, 504, free and reduced lunch. The state of Connecticut identifies students as high needs or students of high needs if they meet one of 3 criteria. If they're special education, if they're free and reduced lunch, or they're an English language learner. Here in Old Saybrook, about 40% of our kids qualify as being high needs. They may come as a shock to certain people in the community to say, well, that's not us. We're a small coastal shoreline town. We don't have a lot of high needs. The reality is, those are the changing needs we're referencing when we're talking about the needs and the resources that we need for our kids. But if you look at enrollment, I know there's been a lot of conversation about enrollment decreasing over the years. Look, it's not going up dramatically, but every little, every student that we get beyond what we had in October 1 is the way I look at it, it's a benefit. So we are up a little bit, about almost 10 kids since this number was official. It's not going to matter. The state only takes October 1. Moving on. All right, Dr. Fletcher, you can explain it.
Well, thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Going along with what was just mentioned, our multilingual learners are steadily increasing, and they have been increasing over the years. This group of students are part of that group of students that meet the definition of the state as being high needs. So when we're looking at the changing demographics, when we're thinking about all of the resources and the additional resources that we may need, either instructionally, curriculum-wise, or the supports, is supporting these students who are in that high needs category.
One of the conversations that we had, which maybe sometimes people don't, when you do this for a living, it's easier to understand it all. But sometimes just the average citizen may watch this for 1 time a year to say how much is the school asking for. We don't make that correlation between the needs of the student is reflective in, and I'll give Karina credit for this, she brought it to my attention too. The actual request versus the needs of what our kids are. So the higher needs of our students, just look at it sort of the simplistic way you can think of it. The more needs, the more resources you're going to need to meet those. So as your kids at 40%, that's 1 in every 4 kids qualifies, not by our definition, by the definition of the Connecticut State Department of Education, qualifies as a student of high needs. Reality is we're going to need more resources to make sure that we're meeting those and balancing that fiscal responsibility, but our obligation to meet those needs of our kids are what's paramount. Which brings us to the next slide, is what the superintendent is requesting. So as you said earlier, we started with a sustained services budget of about 5.2%. Then we got all of our requests through that sustained services budget. We spent some time with our administrators, and that number was able to come down to about 5%. And then ultimately what got in front of you today for our proposal is 3.76%, or about a $1.1 million increase. We'll get into the history. I'll explain a little bit why we've kind of settled on that number. There's certain things that we don't control that came in a little bit different than what we anticipated. But within that number, this is kind of paramount for me. I didn't want to be the new guy who asked for like 15. Because I didn't want to get run out of town before I actually got here. So that's why I didn't have to. I'm kidding, joking. Nice to meet you. But this is typically what the superintendent's approved budget history. So if you look back at last year, predecessor requested about 3.4%. So we were sort of in that ballpark. The year prior to that was a bit of an anomaly with a higher request. I don't know what went into there. I'm assuming there was some ARPA relief money that was going away. But if you look traditionally, we're in that 3% range. So we made a conscious effort to stay within that range as best we could. Obviously, we're a little higher than the request last year, but the cost of doing business and the needs of our kids have increased a little bit proportionately. So that's the history of what the superintendent has asked for. We wanted to make sure that we stayed in that ballpark for what the request would be for this year. Okay. Now I can turn it over to the one who can really answer the questions, and that is Ms. LeShiv.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is a very familiar pie chart for you, showing the majority of our expenses are related to salaries and benefits. We are in a service industry, so it is very typical and we fall within the expected range for that. If you were to click on the titles at the bottom, it gives you some specific details line by line. For instance, Trent, you can look at benefits. So you can see the different components that make up benefits, from life insurance to Social Security. Social Security and Medicare obviously is driven. It's a payroll tax based on as our wages increase. We have retirement costs that are, and I see there is a typo in there, that are part of either contributions to employees 403Bs or part of our traditional or defined contribution plan. I do want to share that part of that number is our employer contribution for the traditional pension plan with the town. The town gives me their number, their actuarial defined contribution. That although we do not have anyone new entering into that plan, we still have people who are paying into the plan, as well as the role will move that more and more people are collecting from the pension and not contributing to it. Because as they get to retirement age, so that although that plan is being sunset, there still continues to be contributions that need to be made to that program. And will for several years to come. And I do expect that even if we were to have everyone on our rolls no longer contributing to it, we will still need to make employer contributions as defined by the actuaries. They get that number, they let me know what it is. So that has driven that cost up a bit as well. Our tuition reimbursement is defined based on collective bargaining agreements. We have left our unemployment number flat. Year to year, it really depends. For a municipality, we get billed based on utilization, not based on payroll premiums. So all it takes is one or two people to claim, and therefore we leave that number flat. Workers' compensation is driven by payroll, and so that has a slight increase. But as you will see, our largest increase in this area is health insurance. We are anticipating premium costs for the premium portion of that budget to increase 15% based off of experience. This year, we have also seen additional staff members transition from leaving insurance to enrolling in insurance. We also are adding funds for estimate of paraprofessionals based off of our negotiations, where they now will have the opportunity to have 50% of single benefits paid for by the Board of Education. So there's an anticipation of a fairly small number of people who will be coming on and gaining that benefit. But additionally, as part of the way our program is structured in the past, without having paraeducators as a part of the contracts that they had in place, have eligibility to have employer paid benefits, we do plan for the IRS payments that we owe back to the IRS for employees who have gone to the marketplace and received tax credits. Those are the bits and pieces, as well as the HSA contributions and what we pay staff members who have a benefit of, if they waive insurance, they can receive payment as well. So there are a number of things in that one line, which is why it's greater than the 15% of just premium increase. And truly it's $500,000. It's a big driver in the budget increase. And then we have left, we have administrators who have disability, long-term disability coverage through us, and that's a flat benefit. If there are other areas, we do have an opportunity later in the presentation as well that has grouping of categories that might be a little more beneficial to look at than such generalized areas below this. If you were to open and view the slideshow off of the website, you can click on those and explore those areas unless there is someone who specifically wants to see something on this slide. We can move forward. You're familiar with this slide as well, as I spoke originally with the slide previously. 70.5% or the majority of our budget in the service industry represents the salaries and benefits. These four categories are the largest portions of our increases or high, and that includes our salaries. As anticipated based on negotiated increases, it's 3.16% without having any changes in the number of staffing. That is as expected. We spoke overall of all the benefit categories together have increased 15.84%. The next category is when we state tuition, we're talking about when we place students outside of Old Saybrook schools, or if students have chosen to go to vocational, agricultural, or technical schools, or magnet schools, we pay a tuition to those districts or those institutions. And so that dollar amount is reflected there. We do see a decrease, and that is driven partially by reduced state vocational and technical and magnet school tuitions by statute have been reduced. So there's a piece of it there, but a part of that is also because we have been able to service more of our students, special education students in district. And so therefore, we're not paying tuition to other entities to send them out of district. Please keep in mind, this can change at a moment's notice and can fluctuate considerably. When at this point, we do have so few students, 1 or 2 students can change that number. And we would have to address that at that time. And finally, transportation has increased. The increase you see is not as high as the contract increase that we talked about when we were setting the transportation contract last year. And that is offset again because we have had fewer students outplaced. Often those students have transportation costs. And so that savings has offset the day-to-day regular transportation costs. And we can move to the next.
And this is something you're familiar with. This is, we're entering year 3 of our teacher's contract. So you can see over the first 3 years, the teachers union contract here was about 11.5%, which sort of outpaced the state average of 12. But you'll notice in the first 2 years, it was the percentage increase for Old Saybrook teachers was a bit less than what the state average was. But and that kind of caught up going into next school year. So the average is going to be about 4% as opposed to 3.8%. The state average, but it's still overall, it's still a less expensive 3-year contract than what the state average was. Just as a reminder, that process is starting again in next August. So by statute, it's 240 days from the budget submission date, which in our case is technically March 1st, even though we do February 1st, but March 1st is our one on record. So you go 240 days back to that, that's when we have to commence negotiations. So that will be coming up this summer. Moving on. This is a history of our teaching positions, like we sort of showed the history of enrollment decreasing a bit. This obviously is going to be reflective of the amount of certified staff members that we've had back from 2017 to today, but in the budget that I proposed, we are at 139.05 certified FTEs. And my budget recommendation is going to be to retain that. There is no decrease in staff and or services and or programs in anything that's part of this 3.7% increase. Moving on. This is just a reflection on the per pupil expenditures in our area towns. Now, again, some of this is subjective because you're dealing with districts that may be a little bit smaller, so their percentage might be a little bit higher There's a region school district in here, which could be a little bit skewed, but in essence, what we pay per pupil here in Old Saybrook compared with our area towns is essentially right in the middle. And every place is a bit different, but just for historical perspectives, that's what our average per pupil expenditure is. Moving on. I'm giving Pam all the bad slides.
All right, this is also a very familiar slide to you. We have added this year's projections for increase. As we have already mentioned, we anticipate premiums increasing 15%. We have been advised that the expected average for trend for the state is going to be around 10. But as you can see, over the past several years, we have been considerably below state trend increases. And with everything else, there's generally an up and a down, and we are in that stage where our experience is driving these increases. And that's reflective in the slide. Trent? What I want to point out that although we have a higher increase percentage-wise, that can often be deceptive as statistics can go. So we like to show this slide, which compares with you, many of the other districts around the state have taken participation within the state partnership plan. And although their plan increase for the coming year might be less than ours, overall, their premium is still significantly higher than ours for either single, two-person, or family coverage. So keeping that in mind, we still feel comfortable that although we have that increase coming, that it is still the most affordable and flexible option for the district to be able to provide coverage to our staff. And this is where I talked about that we have an opportunity to look at some groupings of categories within the budget. And again, this works much the same way as the other slide did, but in this case, you would click on the box. For instance, Trent, if you can click on water, electricity, and natural gas. This shows you line item totals throughout the district for water costs. And based on water has always been a challenge because we have irrigated fields. So you have a very dry summer and your costs are going to go way up. So looking at past experience, it's not as simple as taking what was last year's expenses. Connecticut Water says it's going up 2%, just add 2% to that. You have to try for the purposes of the irrigation and work in some moderation of usage and not necessarily over budget because we had a really dry year and our costs went way up. So there is some flexibility in where that number should lie. But looking at what was approved this year and what our past few years' expenses are, we're going with the proposed reduction of about $10,000. Natural gas has seemed to be fairly steady. Where you do see a significant increase is electricity. I think we all know that. I think we all see that. There are additional fees that we incur as everyone else does. And so we've tried to accommodate that within the budget. That's also part of our zero-based. We really look at every line and we don't just add a flat percentage to each category. We can go back if somebody has a particular area that they want to see.
And this is not, I don't want a discussion. I just want to bring up a point with electricity that it's been going up and up and up, and you're seeing more people putting on solar, and I know we've looked at it several times over the years.
That brings up, that brings up a good point, because I know it has been discussed, and one of the things that we were looking at with, or that had been mentioned to us, with air conditioning going in at Goodwin, wouldn't this be a prime opportunity to put solar panels on Goodwin and to offset that cost? Except all the piping for the air conditioning is run along the roofs. Because that was the only way we could retrofit it. So there's no way we can put, we can't put solar panels on the roof because that's where all the piping, because they're unit ventilators. So each classroom, every one of those classroom has piping that gets connected.
Schools, as we,
Depending on the way they have air conditioning. They're not all set up that way,
Future
but because,
considerations.
right,
That's all. I don't want to tie it up. Yeah.
all right. Next slide. Our capital operation budget. As proposed, it's a slight reduction from last year, but because, as Chris has mentioned, the way our staff has maintained our facilities and we want to continue that moving forward, we look to keep that amount of money fairly consistent year over year so that we can address needs and situations before they come to the forefront. One of such things, if you recall in the fall, we had an issue at the Goodwin School with a smoke condition. And that came in as a pull station alarm, which would tell our emergency services that more often than not, there's either a smoke or an active fire, that somebody stood there and pulled the alarm and showed up in a specific wing. It was a smoke detector in a different hallway, because at one point when work was done on that system, it didn't get reconnected properly. So as the alarms get rung in, they don't ring in accurately. So one of the things that was recommended from the fire marshal was to replace our final fire panel. There's an estimate in there based off of when we had a lightning strike at the middle school for an approximation. We also have the wooden stockade fence at Goodwin that runs from Old Boston Post Road down to the back and then again across the back. That is falling down in sections and needs to be replaced. So we've taken that opportunity within this budget cycle. The middle school, we have an undependable water heater that we would like to get replaced. Carpeting at the library is worn and stained in spots, so we're looking at having that replaced. Our next building that we're looking to have air conditioning added to would be the middle school. And in order to do that, and potentially, although there is no grant funding available now, we need to have the evaluation done as well as new proposals. All the information we have is dated on options previously, so we need to look at that. And then we did have an existing rooftop air conditioning unit go down in the fall. We've held off replacing it because we did not have funds in this year's budget for it. And so that would be the replacement cost. It is a room that had technology in it, does not currently, but as we're looking to get that building air conditioned, it's already set up for it, so we would want to have that replaced. High school has requested outside the cafeteria, they currently have picnic seating, and they would like to, instead of on the grass, have a paver patio to reduce the dirt and dust into the building. You've seen this before. In the current budget, we had planned on doing furniture in the arts band and chorus. That's the ABC lab down in the art wing. However, the furniture that they want to be situated in a way that's more in group settings, but all the wirings and the cable drops are set up for straight lines. So looking at that, we realized there were additional costs. So we pushed it off and included those additional costs for next year. Looking to have a shed for baseball and lacrosse over by the track so that equipment is not dragged back and forth and allows that equipment to last a bit longer. And then district-wide, really for central office, not central office as much it is grounds, is we have a very old field conditioning machine, either 70s or 80s, that is used to, Brendan's laughing.
I've driven it. It's
We
very
call,
old.
we call it vintage. So we're looking to update that machine and replace it before it just is not functioning at all. So that's what we're looking for the capital.
Can I ask a question before you go on? The fire panel, that seems very concerning, that it's not functioning in a way that accurately reflects where a potential fire incident or smoke incident may be happening. Why aren't we replacing that now? Why wait until our FY 26 budget is approved? That, right? I mean, that's a safety feature.
It is a safety feature, but that safety feature is functioning. It's not as accurate as it could be. It hasn't been accurate for many years. It still gets the fire department and the police department to the building. It might take a little bit longer to like narrow down, but it has never put anyone at risk. It's more of it would improve accuracy and timing for coming in, but it is not a matter of increasing risks to students or staff, which is why we aren't.
Though, right?
It could be, but the fire marshal has not said to us, they've said, we recommend, if you can, in the upcoming
So
budget,
they've had.
to replace this. As he was standing with me in October.
That makes me feel a little better than the
Yeah,
fire marshal.
no, because he would have told us we had to do it and we had to do it now. He said, I recommend if you can, in the upcoming budget, get this fixed. We would really, really like it. It would make things easier. So it's definitely not a situation that's putting students at risk, which is why we want to put it through the process. And they would not let us operate if it was something that would be increased risk for anybody. But I definitely appreciate your concern for that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I gave you all the bad side.
I was gonna say,
This is where our anticipated grant funds are. The one that's probably most familiar, most popular is the first, the education cost sharing. Or the ECS grant. You hear a lot about that in local media and when the state starts negotiating their budget. That essentially is the state's portion of reimbursing the town of Old Saybrook for public education. And as you can see, town of Old Saybrook receives about $131,000. Put in perspective, the state mandated Science of Reading program or ARC that we went through costs more than that. That's just one mandate. So in the big picture of things, yeah, you're better off quitting and telling them to keep their money, but you legally can't do that. So it's just a bone of contention that I've had for and then you could see what the contribution from the federal government is directly to us, particularly through IDEA and entitlement grants. And moving on to the last one is our anticipated grant. And this, as you can see, I'm sure you're all familiar with a lot of the COVID relief money that is now all since dried up. Some of the grants that we receive for bilingual or adult education is very minimal. And there are times that the state will have different competitive grants or different initiative grants that we don't anticipate any for next year. So for this particular year, we have a $15,000 grant. We don't anticipate that continuing for the following year. So all in all, we're heavily reliant on local taxpayers here in this community as opposed to other districts that may get more contributions from the state or the federal government. That said, in conclusion, I want to make sure that I reiterate to anyone who's watching at home that during this proposal, there is no reductions in staff or programming. It doesn't mean that everything will look the same, because a lot of that is dependent upon who will still be here. We will have staff members that will turn over. We will have kids come in with different needs and we can't anticipate in January that are going to come to fruition over the summer. So this is a fluid process. It's a fluid document, but it was important for all of us that are in the room to know that the document supports the strategic plan, which is a promise that this board made to the community to continue, as Pam just reiterated, about investing in our facilities. Legislative mandates are there whether we like them or not, and we have to oblige by them. We still have to keep it with an eye open because this is a referendum community, so we have to show that responsibility to the taxpayer. We are beginning the process of planning for the next strategic plan. This one's due to expire in a year, and it's incumbent upon us to look at, as our needs of our kids are changing, as a lot of new faces are in the district, what does this look like and where do we want to take the vision of this district going forward? But that's a process that has to start now. Again, I put out a sort of a mandate to our administrators at the beginning of the year. We talked about what do we want to set for goals. But as long as there's a goal set that increases access and opportunity for students, you're not going to hear me argue it. And you'll have my support on it. One of the things I've always told the staff, especially DLT, the first time I met him was, I'll support you in anything, but just be prepared to answer one question. How's it good for kids? And they've done that. And that's why it's important for them to be in the room tonight so they can hear me say that they have not let me down in that sense. So I appreciate that. We have obviously contractual obligations Changing demographics, our student needs, as we highlighted, are continuously changing. And last but not least, this is an opportunity for us to really look at our programming and our evaluation of that programming and the development and elevation of what we currently offer and what's possible for us to offer to meet the needs of not only our students here, but what our incoming students are for moving forward. So with that, that looks exactly like what you guys have been used to, I think. And if I deviated a bit, I apologize. But that is the superintendent's proposed budget that you will take action on the next time.
Any questions? Karina?
I just have a question related to the citizens presentation information that was shared at the beginning of this meeting. Because, right, that the timing of that is very fortuitous. I hadn't heard about any of that prior to tonight, and I wonder if there's any.
So I have met with that gentleman, as I believe Pam has, and I believe my predecessor has. To the best of my knowledge, we have a current copy agreement with our current vendor that was signed predating me. We are in year one of that agreement. When this gentleman brought the information, I have no reason to believe that he is not being accurate in what he's sharing, but I have no way to verify whether or not what he's sharing with me was accurate. Unfortunately, as he mentioned, we are part of a consortium with CREC. So the contract and the bidding requirements that CREC authorizes, we are a member of. Essentially, we would have to question the validity of CREC's bidding process. In order to do that, because we have a current signed contract with our vendor, we would essentially have to get out of that agreement, but not just challenging the vendor, but challenging the bid, the overseer of the bid, which in this case is CREC. That would also require us to get a legal opinion on what our standing would be. Unfortunately for us, CREC and Old Saybrook Board of Education have the same attorney. So we would need a conflict waiver to do that. And then we would have to procure a different, and my response to the gentleman was, I'm not in a position today to give you an answer to say I'm quitting, but I'm going to need some more time, and this is more complex than when you and I met over the summer, and that's the last conversation we had to listen.
And some additional information in my board reports last year, I did address in that there had been a question about a recent contract for copiers. And he did come in and meet with us. I went back, so CREC establishes the pricing and then the vendor writes the contract. And so CREC doesn't vet the vendor's contract. So what we did, based on the gentleman's recommendation, because he knows the person up at CREC, I presented our contract to them. They went through it, and based on the information that they gave us, they outlined that it was within the parameters of the contract that they approved. So based on their review of the contract that we had signed, they said it did not exceed the parameters of their contract when they reviewed it. They didn't write the contract, but they took it back and they took a look at it. So at the time, before Chris was here, our response was, we've had it reviewed by the person who approved and issued that contract pricing. And they say that this contract meets the parameters of it. Now, is it necessarily the best deal? Could it have been a better deal? Unfortunately, there is that potential, and that was done prior to my taking the position. But unfortunately, the terms of a contract that's under CREC's based on their evaluation of it, they say, based on this, it does not exceed, and it was a do not exceed pricing contract. It doesn't exceed it. So we did not see where we had an opportunity to break what had been identified as a valid contract. So we did go through those steps. We did share that information with him. I understand that it was, not of his opinion that it was the best deal we could have gotten. So that's why
Yeah,
Chris
there's
had said,
dramatic differences between what he quoted, but I wonder if, like, as far as, and I totally get the conflict of interest, maybe we can have the town attorney serve as
I've spoken to the
Okay.
first selectman about this as well.
Good, okay, yeah, I just, with it being on record, it could be a concern as we go to referendum, which I'm sure you're aware. Thank you.
Just as reference, Pam, how long are we in this current contract for?
This contract was negotiated for 5 years.
5 years. We're in year one.
We're just about to begin year 2.
And, who did we contract with prior to this arrangement?
This contract that was signed was with the existing vendor. And as far as the board policies, obviously, we have purchasing policies in place. There are policies and procedures that we go through. One of the policies is if it's above a certain dollar amount, it either goes out to bid or it's contract pricing where another entity has gone out to bid. And that's where this fell, is that it was contract pricing that CREC went out and secured a not to exceed price. And that was the contract that was presented by our existing vendor and was signed.
You don't have to go out to bid if you can buy off of another approved process like a state contract. or in
If
this
somebody
case,
else
the
went
CREC
out to bid.
consortium. So they meet all the criteria of your bidding process and you're allowed to buy off of that. Which makes a small district and makes it advantageous for us so that you don't have to go through an expensive bidding process. But is it the best contract out there? Maybe not. This is the one we have, and if we want to get out of it, we're gonna have to commit resources to doing it. And it wasn't something that I could answer in that moment. So that's why we are. And I don't know if we want to get into any more specifics about that in a public setting, because somebody already referenced lawyers.
I just had a question in general about contracts like this, not necessarily about this one. 5 years seems like a long time. Is that a standard length for contract? I don't know, what might be apples to apples here but that does seem like a long period of time to lock in,
In the period of, contracts, that is the longer side of a contract. And based on my limited experience in this type of a contract, I think you would see anything 3 to 5 years.
Typically,
yeah.
I don't know the rationale behind.
Okay, no, I was just, I was really referring to other things.
Quick question, looking at the difference between the sustained services budget, administrator's budget, and superintendent's, is it public information what wasn't able to be fit into the budget? Like what was requested but didn't quite make it this time?
As far as public information, meaning.
Just wondering what was requested, that maybe next year could be considered, or what were schools looking for their cutouts?
It's in the budget book, so behind the introductory letter, there's a printout of a spreadsheet of reductions that brings you from the administrator's starting requested dollar amount. And then the things that were worked with the administrative staff and the superintendent that were taken out to get us to where the superintendent. So it outlines the change between the administrators and the superintendents.
Thank you.
So I think to that point in common practice, and I appreciate the fact that we've tried to come in around that 3 to 4% range to keep consistent, but also recognizing the fact that our demographic is changing and we have a higher percentage of high needs students within our district now. I mean, that number is quadrupled in terms of percentage in the last 10 years. While we've remained relatively flat at like a 3% or so. I would personally like to see, I think there's other members of the board as well, like what would that wish list look like? What are your next level of priorities? And I don't expect that tonight. We can take some time between now this proposal and when we would review it at next meeting or further iterations of the budget. But just what would be next, right? If it's not that 3% cutoff, and maybe that's what you're getting at, Jack, too, to kind of understand that.
To some extent, like, starting with like a kind of a wish list, in a perfect world scenario, what would you want? That would serve our students best.
You could thank health insurance, because we had about $300,000 worth of more stuff in there until that number came in a little bit higher. So that's something that we can start having we can have those, start crafting that wish list for you before you're required to make any decisions. I think one of the things that we're all starting to recognize, and I'll speak for the group on this, is we're very lucky that we have a lot of capable people, but a lot of people who are spread into different areas. So maybe not necessarily like, hey, we're gonna put in a brand new program at the middle school next year, and that's gonna be X amount of dollars. It could be that we do a piece here and a piece here and just expand upon that particular program. So it's just being creative and a different way to look at it. So it's not as cut and dry as, I got these 5 things, and I want you to pay for them. It involves more of a, sort of shuffling a deck.
Any further questions by the board? All right, thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, then we'll go into our assessment presentation. Dr. Fletcher.
Drop in, I'm gonna try to share my screen.
So while he's
Don't
doing
break
that,
it.
just a reminder, and it's on the agenda that it's next Tuesday, that there's a combined meeting presenting this to the Board of Finance, is that correct? Like,
Yes.
and is that here or is that in the town hall? And is there an expectation for our membership to be?
My understanding is that's a joint meeting and there's an expectation that both parties.
So I just thought it was important to.
We have to have it at the middle school on occasion as well.
Dr. Corinne, I will not be in attendance. I have house guests.
That's the 21st at what time?
6 o'clock.
6.
It's on the reminders on the agenda.
Oh, sorry, okay, all right.
Yeah, I know it's a reminder, but like, I think it's important for people to recognize that it's an important reminder and it's an unusual meeting for us to have as far as scheduling time, so.
I did not.
Again. I guess I'm up. Yeah, Trent and I have been working to get this together so that we are in peace and rhythm. And what a perfect opportunity to talk about accountability index on the heels of our budget presentation. So if you will, Trent. Got it. So tonight's presentation, we'll look at the 23-24 accountability index. We'll look at academic achievement and growth, college and career readiness, as well as arts and physical fitness, and see what our scores are with that. But I didn't want to bury the lead, and you would see the lead if my good friend trying to move that bar from the top. That our headline. Sorry, I don't know if I can. There we go. I can't. I spoke too highly too soon. Sorry. 2.7 increase on our accountability index, which is much different than I came to you with last year, where we saw a decrease from 81.7 to 77.4. This year we are, for last year's scores, we actually see an increase. And that is not in one particular place, that can be seen in all 3 of our schools. So knowing that we have similar schools along the shoreline that we compare to, we are right there in the middle at 80.1. To the left is Clinton, 79.3, and our regional region 4 is at 65.1.
So region 4 is like the Essex, Deep River. Did we look at Lime Old Lyme? Because I think we're closer, I don't know, are they in a different district or, I mean,
In the old DIRG format, they are in a different DIRG than we would be considered. But looking at region 17, they are at, for last year, 81.3. The year before, they were at 81.
Dr. Fletcher, is this accountability index specific to Connecticut, or is it a national standard that people strive for?
It is it is across the state of Connecticut and measuring how well our schools are doing. In, I believe, 13 statistical categories. Well, but there's some subset categories that make it a little larger. It's also how we report back to the federal government and the National State Department of Education of how well our schools are doing. So a couple of our key focuses for last school year, we were looking at addressing chronic absenteeism. That was something that was a district-wide effort. We had a focus on our ML/EL population, which we looked at inside of our budget, as well as an introduction to the vision of high-quality instruction, which is our second pillar inside of our strategic plan, and trying to create that shared vision of high-quality instruction. So those three components were some of our key goals that we were focused on for last school year. And moving forward, these are all of those categories that were just being referenced. In terms of 23-24, we saw chronic absenteeism come down for two of the categories in which we report out on are all students and our high needs students. So when the state is actually looking at how well we're performing, they look at how our entire student population is doing. And then they also look at that subset of the high needs students and see how they're doing. Now, for chronic absenteeism, that is 4A and 4B. You can see those decreases in terms of our chronic absenteeism. We also saw increases across 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, and 1F in terms of our achievement data for all students as well as high need students. And in another key area, looking at progress towards English proficiency, we saw in literacy an increase there for our EL and ML students. So our focus for 24-25, considering how we can raise achievement and growth for all of our students. And that has been a big piece that Superintendent Drezig has echoed in a lot of our DLT meetings. And that has been something that we talked about, expanding that focus. Last year, we had a very intense focus on just our EL, ML students. But knowing that they represent 7.8% of our student population, we wanted to include the other students who also have that great need, knowing that 40% of our students are inside of that designated high needs category. So now we're expanding our focus to also include students with disabilities, as well as our students receiving free and reduced lunch. Considering equity through high quality instruction, that is something that also gets reflected inside of our budget, thinking about the resources that we'll need to provide programming that meets the needs for our students. So we want to make sure that not only are we providing high quality instruction as we determine inside of Pillar 2, we also want to make sure that we have the resources available for teachers to actually reach that ability to instruct at a high level.
Can I ask a question on that slide, or do you prefer it at the end? Okay, just a quick question on,
Sure.
so the 8% of English language learners, what's the distribution across the three schools? And similar question of the 40% of high needs, what's the distribution across the system?
Right now, I don't have the specifics and I can come back with that information, share that back with the board. I know offhand that our highest population in terms of our EL, ML are at Goodwin. And now they're starting to go up into the middle school, then to the high school. But I can give more specific data on those points. I wanted to be able to show this in two ways as well. Having the ability to look at our achievement data and break that out so that we can celebrate all of the hard work that our teachers and our leaders have been doing in the buildings with students. Where we see the growth for ELA, for math, as well as science, with a large component of that being in the high needs category for science. We've seen, I would say, the largest growth that we've seen in terms of achievement has been science at the high school. And I know that the science department at the high school had been working very diligently to see how they can improve some of their practices. When they're offering the test, how are they providing prep? And also considering their sequence of courses and what they're offering. And that is reflective inside of the scores for last year. In terms of growth, growth is something that we only see in grades 3 through 8. Growth is the percentage of students who meet their growth target. The only the only assessment that measures growth is our Smarter Balance assessment. So that is something that once students take in grade 3, then it gives us a growth target for those students. We did not meet that growth target inside of ELA for all students. However, in ELA for our high need students, we saw a 2.6% change. Math, all students 7.8, while high needs, we saw growth there as well. I wanted to point out the fact inside of the oral proficiency with our progress towards English proficiency, we didn't see the growth target that we hoped that we would see. But this is just another area of a subset of our population that is in that high needs category. And we're going to continue to focus on the aspect of language demands of academic performance. So we'll keep working on that and providing professional learning to address that need. Same thing, additional indicators looking at chronic absenteeism for both all students and high needs. As Mr. Plotkins was mentioning earlier in terms of CCR enrollment and also students passing exams, that is also very high and we're receiving a lot of our points in the accountability index for that. One thing I do want to call our attention to, especially because it's low hanging fruit, is physical fitness exam in terms of the participation rate. Now, this is something that we have been looking into, is particularly at the high school. And that could just be a way in which we're reporting. So I have been in contact with the state. I have been working with our ILT member, Melissa Martin, have worked with Brendan on this, and we've been discussing this since the school year has begun. This is something that we can address this school year and hopefully see progress towards that indicator.
Yeah, well, that's what I was gonna ask you, but that's what jumped out on the statistics and data page earlier. Was that fiscal number 11, physical fitness, the 19.9 points earned out of 50, if I'm reading that correctly?
That is
And
correct.
I don't understand why on physical fitness and the participation rate. I'm confused. I don't understand that.
It
It's
is.
such an outlier.
It is an outlier, and that is one of the things that we want to address right away, because we're just talking about the number of students in a particular grade level in which the fitness exam is given that have participated inside of said exam. So we're looking to see if this was an anomaly in terms of the way that it was reported, if there was erroneous data that was entered, or if we were just missing students who were supposed to participate who didn't participate. So this is something that we know that this is something we can correct very easily. And we see that 19.9 out of 50 points feels really low. And that's something that we could address quite easily by just having students participate in the physical fitness.
And it's not even their level of fitness that we're measuring.
No,
It's the number
this is just.
So like, it's a meaning of accountability.
Yeah, scheduling, it could become and again, past experience, because not every student at the high school takes gym.
Right.
Oh,
Or
I
PE.
didn't know that. I
So
thought
if they don't take PE, they're
Yeah.
not eligible to take the
Right.
exam, and if it falls within that year, and they don't take it, they're left off,
Oh,
so.
I didn't know that.
There's, as
Well, that
Dr.
explains
Fletcher
that.
said, there's,
Yeah.
there could be a different.
Okay.
And those are all things that we are currently looking into. Is it the fact that because it's offered in semesters that a
Okay.
student missed the fall semester when it was offered,
Okay.
and now they're taking a
Yeah.
different PE course? but all the other students took it in the fall.
Yeah, gotcha.
So now
Okay.
we're looking into, is this something where we offer it all year long? In
Yeah.
the fall and in the spring? Is it, do we change our requirements? So this is something that we're quite confident that we can earn more points just by looking at this.
Okay,
Well,
okay, thanks for explaining.
and given that drawdown on our overall score, that really kind of says, you know, that we're still at a pretty good score.
Yeah.
You know, so the things that are less easy are going in the right way.
And another thing that I have to point out, knowing our population size. Because it's smaller numbers,
Anyone,
if it's one or two students.
Oh, it really impacts.
It has a major impact, and that has been conversations that.
Yeah.
I have had with everyone in the DLT, with members of the state, we are all very aware. So we're really trying to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to ensure that we're getting the best possible results. And that it shows because just one or two students in a small district has
Yeah.
a major impact.
Yeah, these, well, it's more than 12, but you know, all of these indicators, those stay consistent or that's it. That's gonna be what it's gonna be going forward for a long time.
When we look back at slide 3. It is these same indicators.
So that they don't ever slot it out like, okay, they've got physical in here, physical fitness, so, okay, all right, this is what we're stuck with, okay.
Our overall accountability index scores for these indicators that you are seeing on slide 6. So, and they will always be that unless it's a statewide change.
The state's 12-step.
Yeah, 12-step program with a lot of those.
and where you see the reductions, it's not because new people moved in, it's measuring against third grade and then eighth, so it's the same population.
Same population. Looking at year to year in those same demographics, so it'll still be grades. It will always be next year, or actually in the coming months, because the testing season is month and a half away to a few months away. It's going to be 3 through 8, taking our smarter balance assessment and our NGSS, in the high school during SAT day in April. Well, let's talk successes. Slide 11. ELA, math, science performance index, all students continues to be a strength inside of our district. The science performance, as I mentioned earlier, is a strength inside of our district. Students accessing the CCR, AP courses, ECE courses, that continues to be a strength, as well as our art access. That continues to be major strengths, and they show up on the accountability index as wins for us. So we should celebrate those aspects. Moving to the next slide, some of our focus for the 24-25 school year, considering how we raise achievement and growth for all of our students. The way that we raise achievement and growth for all students is by having that widened focus on our high need students. So again, I know this sounds like a lot of echoing that same sentiment, but we know the needs that we have with our high need students. Spring reduced lunch, we can't really narrow that down. So that's kind of like the hidden one inside of all of it. But we do know and have information to identify our students with disabilities and to meet their needs, as well as our multilingual English learning population. So though that continues to be a focus for us. And really considering how do we offer high quality curriculum to help our teachers, help students get to the high quality instruction that they deserve in every period and every day. That continues to be our focus, and that is very much a recent conversation that we had as a DLT, and how do we refocus ourselves around that shared understanding in terms of high quality instruction. Continuing that, we're working collaboratively. Getting ahead of myself with the slides. but it just all feels like it's tying together. So some of our next steps would be sharing this information out with our staff as well as our instructional leadership team. The continued work with our departments and our new evaluation program, thinking about those collaborative learning groups, the PLCs, and delivering high quality instruction. Examining those bright spots like our science data, our math, our ELA for all students. Celebrating the students and educators who are achieving the goals inside of our strategic plan. Like that's one thing that I want to make sure that we're highlighting, celebrating, because this work can become very hard. And we want to be perfect inside of it. Sometimes we miss those opportunities to celebrate some of our wins that we are getting as we're working towards our greater success and improvement. So our next steps continued is solidifying our understanding of that, of high quality instruction. Whether or not this iteration of our old pencil drawing stays the way it is, that's not the major part that we're concerned with. What we're really trying to focus on is that our teachers, our families, the board, all of our stakeholders understand that we're trying to work harder to have students have the best experience inside of our classrooms. And that we are providing that experience every day. And that's what we're going to continue to focus on and make sure that we can get all of the low hanging fruit that will help raise us up to where we are. Thank you.
What a great presentation.
Just a question on my end, because I'm trying to group all the buckets together in terms of the data, right? So we have for ELA specifically, which is usually like a real strength of the district. We have all votes are rising on the performance indices, right? For all the grades. Our high needs in the growth area are also rising, right? Which completely agree with that philosophy. We address all students and everybody comes up, right? But then the kind of the disparate data in there is that all students in the growth in ELA are not rising, even though the high needs are rising in that group. And it's also, but the performance indice is rising. And I recognize that growth is a subset of the 3rd through 8th grade that's doing that. But any insights into that, Dr. Fletcher, or have you guys looked at that? I'm just trying to make sense of that in my head.
Have looked at it. I think it's one of those things that we've seen that kind of shows a larger picture that we had the conversation around, I think, maybe last year. At this time when we had our accountability conversation, which is more reflective of the fact that our scores are relatively flat in that area. So while we are seeing growth and closing some of the gaps, some of the other gaps are kind of staying relatively the same. Or not the gaps, but that growth is still hovering around where it's always been. So when we're looking at, can you put on slide 9, Trent? The idea with ELA for all students, we're always around the same area in 60%. Or that 67.3, that's really not percentage mark. So we are always maintaining that area. And I think by having a greater focus on high quality curriculum and a refocusing around high quality instruction, we may be able to pinpoint some of the gaps to actually lift that from where it currently is.
So we're basically at a flat rate for growth in that population with somewhat of a standard deviation. Maybe we're on like a little bit lower standard deviation in this year, hovering around that 60. But the idea is if we're addressing for all high needs and all population, that maybe we move that bar where that middle ground is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we can move the students who are not identified in that high needs population by providing more targeted instruction inside of other areas.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from board members?
got really quiet.
Yeah.
I know, the fan went
All
on.
right, time to go.
It's interesting to me, the comment that you shared earlier about the students who may not be taking prerequisites for certain courses and that potential impact on some of the classes and how that factors in to some of this, so you've got your work cut out for you.
But it's fun work,
Yeah, right, yeah, but it's something to consider.
yes.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so at this point, we will, need a motion to go into executive session. For the purposes of discussing, the creation of professional goals and objectives of the superintendent. Moved by Alan, seconded by Karen. All in favor? Yeah, aye. All right, so we'll take a break for a second while we're just transitioning. Yeah. Okay, so it is 10:11. We're back in regular session and we'll just need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Elaine, seconded by Alan, all in favor? Aye. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.